Welcome back to another episode of The Mind of Sports, a podcast hosted by me, Jack Kalman, where we dive deeper into the conversation of sports and the impact that they have on the brains of athletes around the world. Before we begin today's discussion, I'd like to take a moment to give those of you who have tuned in a little background information on who I am and why I'm here talking to you today. As I said, my name is Jack Kalman, and I am a freshman student at the University of Maryland, College Park. I'm currently majoring in psychology, which ties into my familiarity with the topic of this podcast, and those who know me know that I'm a huge sports fan. So, if you haven't put two and two together yet, I decided to combine my interest in sports with my interest in psychology to create this podcast, The Mind of Sports, where I talk about the relationship between the two. Now that I got that out of the way, let's get started with today's discussion. And the sport that we will be looking at today is, drumroll please, football. Yes, a sport that we all know and love, football has remained a staple of American culture since the National Football League, or NFL, was founded back in 1920. The violent and competitive nature of the sport has always played a major role in its popularity amongst people and fans of all backgrounds. They loved watching players like Lawrence Taylor, Mean Joe Green, Sean Taylor, Jack Tatum, all of whom were known for delivering the biggest hits every football Sunday. I mean, you can even Google search biggest hitters of all time in the NFL, and you'll be presented with lists of current and former players known for their strong tackling abilities, which just goes to show how much NFL fans really love players who can inflict some serious damage on their opponents. And even a Google search will show you something like the threatening nicknames that fans have given to the hardest-hitting defenses overall, such as the Purple People Eaters for the 1971 Minnesota Vikings, and the Legion of Boom for the 2011 Seattle Seahawks, which just, again, goes to show that violence is praised in the sport of football. However, many have failed to acknowledge that these dangerous tackles that we all love and cheer for can have devastating effects on a player's long-term mental health. Instead of looking for a solution to this unfortunate reality, NFL board members have barely taken any action on the issue and allowed generations of players to put their lives on the line with a risk of permanent damage to the brain. In fact, one of the greatest risks of taking several hits to the head is the development of a brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, better known as CTE, which is going to be the forefront of our discussion today. All right, so as I said previously, I am a huge fan of all things sports, including football. Even though I'm originally from the Philadelphia area, my favorite team has always been the Washington football team. My dad raised me to be a fan of the football team ever since I was a little kid, and I've been rooting for them a little over a decade now. As avid listeners of this podcast know, I never like doing an episode alone, so today I'm joined by another big Washington football team fan, Clayton Steiner.
Hey Jack, how are you?
I'm doing good, Clayton. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm glad that, you asked me to be on here.
Of course. All right, so you're a big Washington football team fan, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so would you care to tell us a little bit more about your history as a fan of the football team?
Yeah, definitely. So, kind of like you, really, my dad, he's always been a football team fan, and he kind of raised me to be a huge fan, and it's been a rough 10 years being a fan of the Washington football team, but I think things are looking up. So
yeah, exactly. All right, so thanks for sharing that with us. And so as you heard in today's introduction, we're going to be discussing CTE and its overwhelming presence in the NFL. So since you're new to this whole conversation, and I would say you have a very unbiased perspective on the issue, I thought maybe you and I could do a little informal Q&A where I'll provide you with some facts or questions around this topic, and you just respond with honest answers or reactions to the best of your knowledge.
That sounds great. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Great. All right, let's get right into it. So, the first question I would say is, what do you know about CTE at the moment? Or is there anything you have heard about the disease in your lifetime as a fan of football? And would you like to share that with us?
Yeah, I think really, I wouldn't be able to give you like a direct like scientific definition, but I think I know. Obviously, like I know that it's a brain disease caused from hard helmet to helmet hits and stuff like that. And I think I've been hearing about it a lot more, to be honest. Over the past few years, I think it's gaining more and more traction, stuff like that. So I think that's pretty good when it comes to discussing the importance of CTE.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I'm glad you brought up you don't really have the scientific definition because I have it right in front of me here. So credit to Craig Lindsay, the Vanderbilt School of Medicine, because he wrote a journal called Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy, which was just a brief historical overview and recent focus on NFL players. And he describes CTE as a neurodegenerative brain disorder caused by repeated hits to the brain over a period of time, resulting in an accumulation of hypophosphorylated tau. And he goes on to say that this protein, tau, spelled Tau, builds up in the brain over time and leads to the atrophy of key regions of the brain, which in turn will cause symptoms of depression, memory loss, paranoia, aggression, and confusion. Now, if you're like me, the first time that I read that definition, you barely know what half of those words mean. So to dumb it down a bit, CTE is basically a brain disease caused by multiple concussions over a period of time, resulting in the deterioration of brain tissue and several behavioral symptoms. So hopefully that helps you understand the disease a bit better. But if you're still struggling, I personally believe that real-life examples are another great way to explain the seriousness of CTE.
Okay.
So I'm going to play a short audio clip from the PBS Frontline documentary League of Denial, where they show an old interview with former center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Webster, otherwise known as Patient Zero, for the discovery of CTE in the NFL. And following his tragic death from a heart attack, an autopsy by forensic pathologist and neuropathologist Dr. Bennett Amalu revealed a clear diagnosis of CTE and sparked a massive uproar of safety concerns from the football community. So here's the clip right now.
Okay.
For Iron Mike, TV interviews became impossible.
No, I'm talking about... No, I'm just trying to find... Yeah, well, trauma, everybody went through trauma as a kid. I'm not saying I was different than that. I'm just saying... the things we do to one another, okay? Hell, I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just tired and confused right now. That's why I say I can't really... I can't say it the way I want to say it. I could answer this real easy at other times, but right now I'm just tired.
Now, just from listening to that audio, what are your initial thoughts and concerns?
Honestly, like I thought it was pretty saddening, to be honest. It sounded like he was, like you said, like really tired and confused, and I'm sure that's obviously caused by the repeated helmet hits, the development of CTE, and to live like that for decades, or having that develop like maybe soon after your career ends and have that go all the way until you die. It's pretty sad, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing that in his voice, he even kind of knows that he's confused, and that's hard to hear. And I mean, after the tragic death of Mike Webster and his diagnosis of CTE by Dr. Malu, several former players who unfortunately committed suicide were later studied and diagnosed with CTE. Most notably, those players were Junior Seau, who took his own life and purposely left his brain unharmed while doing so, just so they could study it and maybe discover more about the disease, and Aaron Hernandez, who killed himself in a prison cell after committing first-degree murder, which showed the aggression side of the side effects of CTE. And both made major news headlines and really put pressure on the NFL to address the issue at hand. So now I'm going to actually play another clip from the same documentary where Dr. Bennett Amalu, who, as we talked about, he discovered the disease first, he explains how the NFL kind of responded to his discoveries. And you know what? Let's just take a listen right now, and you'll hear kind of what the NFL had to say about it.
All right, sounds good.
So we continued talking. At some point, he interrupted me again. Bennett, do you think you know the implications of what you're doing? I said, I think I do. I don't know. He said, no, you don't. So we continued talking again. Then the third time he interrupted me, and I turned to him and said, okay, why don't you tell me what the implications are? I said, okay, I'll tell you. He said, if 10% of mothers in this country would begin to perceive football as a dangerous sport, that is the end of football.
Now, Clayton, as a longtime football fan, how do you feel about those shocking words from Dr. Umalu, where he essentially shows the world that the NFL's priorities are on money and profit over player health and safety?
Honestly, I thought that was really shocking. Yeah. The fact that the NFL would prioritize something like that over, the health and the well-being of their players is to me just, it doesn't really sit right with me, and I know it wouldn't sit right with a lot of people either. Yeah, like you said, it's pretty terrible, and obviously having this information out there would be extremely beneficial to all the players, and the fact that the NFL wants to almost cover it up in a way, I think it's pretty terrible.
Exactly. And, this audio actually connects to a much broader concern surrounding the potential cause and effect relationship between the NFL's knowledge of, which players are bringing in the most money for their league and their decision to send those specific players back on the field before they can make a full recovery from head injuries. And so, just off the top of your head, can you recall any specific examples where you might have seen this relationship play out on the field in the years that you've been following and watching professional football?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, this past season, I remember Patrick Mahomes. He took a pretty bad head injury. I think it was during the playoffs, and everyone was like, "Oh my God!" He stood up. He was wobbly. Everyone said, "Oh my God, he's out for however many weeks. He's gonna miss the playoffs. He'll miss the Super Bowl."
Yep.
But no, he was back in, I think it was less than a week, and that was pretty shocking even to me. I think I noticed pretty quickly that. Something about that didn't really seem right.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's a perfect example. And, I remember looking on social media the day that they announced that Mahomes was going to be safe to return the week later. And people were posting comments everywhere saying, there's no way that he is 100% healthy and can actually make that return in that time, And in addition to the Mahomes example, another journal entry by Brett Siegel called Concussions in Capital, Tom Brady, CTE, and the NFL's Crisis of Identity. He kind of talked about a time when Gisele Bündchen, who is the wife of the star quarterback Tom Brady, she actually controversially announced in an interview that her husband was suffering from regular concussions over the course of a football season that were going unnoticed and ignored by the NFL. And, the NFL, of course, immediately denied her comments, which did not come as a surprise considering that Brady is essentially the face of the NFL, and any bad press on him was going to likely damage his reputation of kind of a money-hungry league like the NFL. All right, so this has been a really great discussion today, and as usual, I like to end each podcast episode with a little explanation as to why we are here talking about the issue at hand. And for one thing, suicide in general is a very serious concern in our society, and when players are deciding to take their own lives as a result of the depressive symptoms caused by a brain disease like CTE, it really requires the utmost attention from NFL fans, executives, coaches, and, even the players themselves. But another reason why I kind of chose to dedicate an entire episode to this topic is because fans do not seem to care as much as they should when it comes to the NFL sending hurt players back on the field before they can recover from their injuries. And as I said before, following the Mahomes injury, social media was erupting with comments and posts claiming that the NFL was sending a concussed player back on the field just because of his reputation as one of the best in the league, which was good because that brought a lot of attention to the issue. However, most of those posts were kind of jokes and memes about how Mahomes was probably going to throw the ball to the other team because he wasn't going to be able to tell the difference between them and his own teammates. And, until fans really start to take this issue seriously, do not expect the NFL to take any further action to prevent the prevalence of CTE in players around the league. All right, so before we wrap up, another quick thank you to Clayton Steiner for joining the podcast today. It was a pleasure to hear your input on this issue.
No, thank you for having me, Jack. I had a really great time, and I always enjoy talking football. So thank you again.
Yeah, no problem. It's good to hear. And, a quick shout out to Craig Lindsley, PBS Frontline, and Brett Siegel for providing us with some fantastic sources and evidence related to today's discussion. Make sure you go check out some of their content and, watch that full League of Denial documentary on YouTube where we pulled both of the audio clips from today, if you get the chance, because it's a great summary of basically everything we talked about, and it goes even deeper into the conversation surrounding the NFL concussion and CTE crisis. And one final thank you to all my listeners who tuned in for today's episode. Your time is greatly appreciated. This has been your host, Jack Howman, on the Mind of Sports podcast. Signing off.